Hi, this is Kathy from Gadget Stop 321, and in today's video, I'm going to be taking a look at Pilot Namiki Blue from a cartridge. Now, unlike my other ink tests that I've done in the past, I've already done a writing sample on 52 GSM Tomoe River paper using a variety of pens and nib sizes ranging from a Pilot Extra Fine to a 1.0 stub nib. Now, since I've already done the writing sample, I'll take a look at the performance of this ink on the Tomoe River paper, and I'll also take a look at how it did on copy paper and Rhodia. I'll compare Pilot Namiki Blue to other blue inks from my collection, and finally, I'll take a look at the results of my water resistance test and the chromatography of this ink. After I did all the writing samples with the cartridge in the various pens, I took an ink syringe and emptied the cartridge into a sample vial and then used the dip pen to do a writing sample and then the tweezers to do a ink swatch. Let me see if I can turn it just right. There's more sheen. You can see down here in the heavier bit, I'm not able to show it on the camera as well as I can see it here. There's quite a bit of reddish or magenta sheen down here, kind of ripples of sheen, not just a solid bit of sheen. On the drip down here at the end, there wasn't a lot of ink in this drip, but there's a tiny bit of sheen down here. There's a fair amount of difference between how dark the heavier part of the swatch is compared to the lighter bit of the swatch, but even the lighter bit of the swatch is fairly well saturated, and you can see that in the writing. You'll notice that, especially with the Pilot Metropolitan, if an ink gets too light down here in the lighter bit, the Pilot Metropolitan with that stub nib tends to be unpleasant. Either it will feel too dry or the ink will just look too pale. But this was very pleasant to write with in that stub nib. It felt very, not glassy smooth, but like a velvety smoothness. It was very nice, and it looks nice as well. Now, my Pilot Lucina, I had taken it to the pen show and dip tested it with some Waterman Mysterious Blue, and I didn't clean it out and it got contaminated. So it's a bit darker. This writing sample is not a very fair representation. I realized that I needed to clean out those pens that I had dip tested at the pen show. So my E95S and Pilot Legno, I went ahead and cleaned them out, flushed them out real good. But I have a feeling I got too impatient and went to do my dip test. There must have still been water in the feed because these two felt kind of dry, and water will do that. If an ink is too watered down, not with lubricant, but with actual water, it will feel dry. I didn't go back and retest the Legno, but I went back and retested the E95S and got it good and the feed good and saturated with ink, and it felt really nice. The Pilot Kakuno just looks so good. It's nice and crisp, and that ink is bold, and it felt nice to write with. The dip test with the dip pen was very pleasant to write with. The ink is nice and uniform and felt nice and smooth. This is just a really well-performing ink. Now, the reason I went to all the trouble to do these writing tests with a cartridge was because I wanted to see if Pilot Namiki Blue was the same thing as Tsuyukusa, because Tsuyukusa has been discontinued, and it was a really well-performing ink, very pretty. And judging by the ink swatches, I can kind of see that there's some difference. There wasn't as much sheen in the Tsuyukusa. It has more of a brightness to it, not much. Like if you looked at these two inks separately, especially just looked at writing, separated from each other, it would be hard to tell the difference. But side by side, you can see a subtle difference, and in this ink swatches, you can see that they perform a little bit differently. But I wanted to be sure, so I did some chromatography. I ordered some chromatography strips, and I'll look at that in just a second. Let me finish showing the writing samples. On Rhodia, now some of these felt dry, like the Lucina. I'm not sure. Part of that could be from the contamination, and I know that the Legno and E95S felt dry because there was water in the feed. Again, retested the E95S, felt very nice. The Kakuno was very nice. The dip pen was really nice. I didn't do my ink swatch on here. I guess I can show that in real time. This is how much ink I got out of the cartridge after I did all the writing samples. I just press the tweezers together, dip it in ink. It works kind of like an automatic pen. I'm going to try this again. It's not wanting to grab the paper. It's hard to get, or maybe instead of laying it over, hold it up straight. There we go. Just needed more ink in the tweezers. That's a nice blue. And you can see once I got enough ink in the tweezers, it really grabbed the paper and it's nice and crisp. Okay, on copy paper, it didn't do bad. It looks pretty nice. It spread a little bit. You know, copy paper is not the most fun to write on with a fountain pen. The Pilot Metropolitan out of all of them was my favorite. It's a dry enough writer that the ink doesn't spread quite as much, but it still looks good and it felt nice to write with. It didn't feel dry. The Kakuno looked really nice, but with it being an extra fine, there was just, you know, there's the feedback that you're going to get from an extra fine nib. So either one of these would be fine. If you want something finer, that extra fine was really nice. And if you're okay with something broader, the Metropolitan is really pleasant to write with. These two in the middle, take those results with a grain of salt. They were contaminated with too much water in the feed. So my Pilot Blue cartridge is very similar to Suyukusa, and really, even in this ink swatch, me looking at it, it's really hard to tell a difference. On nice smooth paper, this is Tsubame ink collection cards. They perform very similarly. Sailor Ink Studio 143 is a similar kind of blue but less saturated and has more of that chromo shading or dual shading quality. But in the writing samples, they look very similar. Waterman Serenity Blue looks more purple when you look at it side by side with Namiki Blue. Diamine Blue Flame also looks a bit more purple. And As a Gal is a bit more saturated. It's a similar kind of blue. I guess a little bit more purple in that, but a bit more saturated. In the water resistance test, Pilot Blue did really well. It blows out a little bit. It spreads out a little bit. I did this writing sample on Rhodia paper, and it set for a day before I submerged it in water for 10 minutes. And it, like I said, it did blow out a little bit, but it's still very legible. And it performed very similarly to Uroshizuku Suyukusa. I don't know if you'll be able to see on camera, but especially when you look at the parts that have kind of spread out, you can see a slight difference in the shade of blue. But the performance is very similar. And when you look at the chromatographies of each, you can see that, in fact, they are very different inks. They're made up of different components. It always surprises me that two very similar looking inks can have such different components. All right, if you found this video helpful, please give me a thumbs up, and if you'd like to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel.